Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to be in our virtual studio today and in conversation with Sophia Kristjansson. And Sophia Kristjansson is behind Lexicon Lens and lexiconlens.com, which I'm looking forward to learning about and understanding. And I'd encourage everyone in our audience to visit Sophia at lexiconlens.com and get to know more about her and the work that she does. You'll find that, of course, in the show notes. One of the things that Sophia does is she applies the concepts of behavioral neuroscience and organizational psychology to help clients understand the reasons for their actions. Her extensive studies abroad, coupled with her international management and marketing roles, provides a fresh, pragmatic approach to transform teams and personal branding. She builds vulnerability, empathy, and acuity across work groups as part of the change management process. She helps professionals transform their leadership, which generates deep, sustainable behavioral change and creates more effective management that supports organizational cultures of inclusion and belonging. Sophia is a published author. She contributed a diversity, equity, and inclusion chapter in the book, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. She's a PhD candidate in organizational psych at Canterbury Christ Church University, a member of the faculty at the University of Denver's University College, where she teaches courses in diversity, equity, inclusion structures, organizational leadership, human resources, and business strategy. So with all of that, I'm going to let Sophia introduce herself and describe herself in her own words. Welcome, Sophia.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here. I won't belabor the point other than to say that I support, I help, I guide organizations and their leaders to achieve change and to build cultures of inclusion and belonging, which can encompass a lot of different kinds of people development. That's the core of what I do and what I'm very passionate about.
Building cultures of inclusion and belonging in organizations of any size is a challenge. I think anytime you have more than one person, actually, it's a little bit like counting in human resources. How many employees do we have? Anytime it's greater than one, it's difficult. You don't know if someone's contingent, if they're part-time, if they're full-time, if they're double-time, if they're exempt or non-exempt. As I think about the work in inclusion and belonging, we've been involved in it for a long, long time. Are we making progress?
Yes. So, very good question to start out with. Not an easy question to answer. I would say I am hopeful about the change that I'm seeing take place in organizations. I am cautiously optimistic because I do believe that there is some form of fatigue that's going on among employees and organizations around inclusion and belonging and DEI in general. And I think as well that organizational leaders can struggle a bit with how to exactly approach the conversation and the change around inclusion and belonging. They've been doing a lot on the back end, right? They thought they were doing all the right things, but have they moved the needle? I'm not so sure. So I believe that organizations are starting to wake up to the fact that DEI best practices must also include, alongside the structures that we traditionally see around business and employee resource groups, inclusion councils and such, that a cultural shift needs to take place, and that change management is hard and takes time. And I'm not sure there's a there. I'm not sure there's a conclusive place that we arrive to. There probably won't be in my lifetime, at least, but there is an attempt to move the needle. And I think that's what's important, to really take a look at how people are treated on teams, how that interaction works between peers, colleagues, and their bosses.
It's interesting to consider all of this. We're recording in May of 2023. I know this will air at some other time, and it'll exist in the ether space forever. And I hope we have listeners forever as well. And thank you all everyone in the audience and everyone who's listening. But as we record this, it's May 2023. It's in the United States, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. And as I was listening, Sophia, I resonate with, I think, most of what you said. It seems to me that organizations, as we know them, again, in any size, are the places where we are enacting civil society today. It's the place maybe where, despite organizations as elements of suppression and domination, and in that construct, it does seem that it may be one of the last places or emerging places for democracy. Because what I think about, and relating it back to mental health, is I think about all of the increasing violence in the United States. And as I think about diversity and inclusion and belonging, we're making advances in being more inclusive with folks who, say, for example, are on the spectrum, and thinking about workplaces and jobs, and how we can create more inclusive places for people with disabilities. And yet, the amount of violence in the United States brought on by guns seems to make it a scary place for a lot of people to, bring more of who they are to what they do. What do you think, Sophia Kristjansson?
Another good question. I think that I hope, if we're looking at the larger picture here, I hope that organizations are not the last bastion of democracy. I hope that the messy process of our country to seek equality will continue, and that will listen to our better sides, right? Because we do have control over our character. And so I guess I'm an eternal optimist in believing that people will rise together. Yes, this is a scary time. Yes, there is a lot of violence that makes people feel afraid. And yes, that absolutely impacts how people feel in their jobs. That is why I believe organizations, if they can create a safe place for their employees, a place in which those employees feel they can show who they are to the degree that they want. There's this saying, we want to bring our full selves to work. I'm not sure that that's the goal. I think probably the goal is we bring who we want to bring to work. We get to decide what levels of ourself we share with other people. Some parts of ourselves we share with those closest to us, and we never would expose in a professional environment. But I do believe that organizational leaders have a responsibility to create a psychologically safe place for their employees, all of their employees, to show their own uniqueness and to feel a sense of belonging, thus creating the feeling of inclusion among their peers, colleagues, their tribe, so to speak, at work.
And as you work in this direction, I'm thinking about Lexicon Lens, which you found it some time ago, to focus on innovation. I think innovation. Say some more about that, please.
So we work with clients who are interested not only in developing cultures of inclusion and belonging, so uh, increasing the feelings of belonging across their teams and building the structures that really matter for DEI, but also want to develop their employees across the board. So looking at ways, meaningful ways for those organizations to enact change and helping them really focus in on what's the most important thing right now. We have to be brutally honest, right? Change takes time. We can't do everything right away. It's a marathon. It is not a sprint. And it's going to take multiple years to achieve the goals that we're looking for. And so helping people understand how to scaffold that change, how to keep people engaged with the change that's going on is, I think, extremely important. And that's really the central focus of what our work is about.
It's so interesting to think about the role of internal chief diversity officers, chief inclusion officers, however they're labeled in organizations. And, whose interests do they represent at the end of the day? If you're aggrieved, it's one challenge. If it's, aspirational for the organization, it's another challenge. And I'm wondering about how we balance what we say and what we do. Authentic leadership, right? Congruency. Hopefully it's more than just what you say and what you do. Hopefully it's what you think as well. But we know that we can train some people to just say the words and don't really believe it. And that's a whole other story. How do we integrate diversity and inclusion, awareness and action in multiple levels of organizations? And one of the saddest events I ever had, I think, as a trainer, I used to do a lot of diversity and inclusion training in big companies, but mostly on warehouse floors, kitchen floors, big industrial corporations with lots of warehouses. And we would, we would do all the stuff at the top of the house, which was really exciting, working on executive development, thinking about reconstituting the board of directors to reflect more of the customer base, more of society. And we'd begin doing these training sessions and everybody would participate. And then I'd go back out, after our 90 minutes or 2 hours and you'd be out in the warehouse. You would hear as many racial epitaphs that you couldn't have imagined would have been said, 10 minutes earlier. And I'm wondering, how do we, for me, this is the question about or the intersection or the distinction between culture and community. I'm giving up more on culture, and thinking more about how do we create community.
So let's see.
What it's a complicated statement and question.
Well, I think where I'd like to start is with leadership. So leadership has that ultimate responsibility to set the tone for what behavior is accepted and not be accepted. And when leadership can say, we do not accept hatred of any kind, shape, or form in our organization. And there are mechanisms for people not only to report, but to scaffold up their experiences in a variety of ways. So whether that's through their own boss or through HR or through a reporting line that they have, a compliance line at work, whether that's through an ERG or another manner, another way, telling stories, focus groups. Those are ways in which you can bubble up those comments and where you can point leadership in the direction of what they need to say to start changing culture. And there's no excuse for any of those statements at any time, because they just kill culture. Now, I would say there is a big challenge. So, we come together in teams and we work together, and the boss, let's say, has the best intentions of instilling the best behaviors, best in class behaviors among his team, where they are collaborating and working together. They are sharing equally, listening to one another. But when that boss leaves the room, there are still snickers that take place. There's maybe some bullying that goes on. There's there's maybe text messages that are privately shared, et cetera. There might be microaggressions. They happen all the time. So that is something that leadership has to be trained for as well. Because if, when they walk out of the room, that behavior continues, the good behaviors will not be practiced. They won't be genuine. They will end up killing off any kind of diversity you have in the room. And we can point to statistics where people, brown and black people, women of color, et cetera, leave organizations more quickly than white males. And I believe that is because the cultural environment is not sustainable for these individuals. So you asked me a very big question, and I took it to kind of one area. I hope I answered at least part of it. But the point is, the bottom line is that leader, any people manager in an organization needs to be aware of how people are behaving behind the scenes, what they're saying when the boss leaves the room, and using tactics to create more openness. So when there are scenarios that are bubbled up to that leader, he or she handles them right away. And maybe in a private setting with the individual who is the aggressor, but certainly among all team members, to reinforce that behavior is not accepted.
So much of the work of instilling humanistic values in workplaces, openness, authenticity, respect, dignity, also true. Yeah, I've been reflecting on a current diversity challenge for me, or conceptualization. As an old white man of privilege, I tend to work with a lot of people who look like me. And recently, a client sought me out for the very physical qualities that I just described. Old, white, privileged man. She is a brown woman, accomplished in her field, an expert in her field, recognized by others. And she rejected Black coaches put in front of her, coaches of other shades and other colors, because of this. And I guess we could explore the psychology of all of this. But I do wonder about, this and how it plays out, and what thoughts you might have in that regard. The intentional pairing of differences, I completely understand. It's a relevant teaching tool. It's a relevant experiential education tool. As it enacts itself in these situations, you have any thoughts on that, Sophia Kristjansson?
Yes, I believe that everybody must be included, including white males. White males have a very important role to play. And as you told your story about being chosen to work with this minority woman, perhaps she wanted the mentorship that you could provide that maybe somebody with a different experience and background could not. And I think that we're shifting, where the pendulum is swinging, right? The pendulum is swinging far to one side and it will even out at some point. So I say to my clients who are focused on other groups only and not white males, I say to them, be careful, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a contingency of people who are very important to you and your business. And they have something important to say that must be recognized. And I could put 10 white males in a room and they would all have a different point of view. Same thing with any other group of individuals I would put into a room. We're all unique. In DEI, we tend to categorize people and look at constructs maybe that put us into boxes as a way to try to understand what is going on. And it is far more complicated than that. And that is why I think that the traditional structures of DEI in organizations hasn't been as successful as we've wanted it to be, that we've put people into boxes and not considered that their nature and their environment, how they've been nurtured, how they've nurtured themselves, is taken into account. We all think differently and we all see the world differently. I have a quick example to share with you. I was in a class on bias, and bias was opened up into many different categories, both visual, non-visual, experiential, and so forth. And we were broken up into small groups. And in my group, I was paired with an individual, a white American man, and we were to talk about which areas of diversity were most important to us. And on this wheel of choices, there were many, many different choices. I chose education as being one of the most important for me. I was always taught, my parents, first generation American, I was taught that education was a differentiator. And so have always pursued to better myself in that way. And this individual said to me, entrepreneurship is the most important to me. I come from a diverse background of immigrants as well. And my father always taught me that no matter what background I have, your education was not the most important. It was how you took action and how you put your ideas into action. And I thought that was just a really big revelation in terms of a blind spot for me in thinking about you had to have an education or be well prepared in order to go into a field. And he was thinking, I have an idea I want to share and I'm going to do it and I'm going to make money doing it. Two very different ways of approaching the same kind of goal. And we really just had a great laugh after that, because if we had not had the opportunity for this conversation, obviously, we wouldn't have come to this conclusion. We wouldn't have realized our own biases that we never even would have thought of. And so I come back to the importance of inclusion for all.
Yes, so important. And I think about all the wonderful lessons I learned from guests on Authentic Change with Mike Horn, such as you. And I think back to three other guests. One, Fanchon Cox of True Jolo, Truth, Justice, and Love. And Fanchon, what I learned from Fanchon recently was to always honor your sense of place, to remember your sense of place, perhaps as you begin a speech or you begin an interaction. So for me, I sit on the land of the Coahuila, and to think about, what is also our relationship with geography and space and what we honor and what we bring. And for my dear colleagues, Fred Miller and Judith Katz, who must be 30 years ago wrote the groundbreaking book, The Inclusion Breakthrough, I learned that our, oldest and best technology in diversity and inclusion is to say hello. And there's nothing more powerful than, acknowledging the other person who's right in front of you by saying hello. I don't know what happened to you 10 minutes ago. I don't know what's going to happen to you 10 minutes, in the future. But we do have this moment in time at which we can meet each other. And I hope that's the way the workplace is evolving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, I agree. And it's a long journey. It really does take time, but I have seen it happen. And I'll point to another example. I worked with an individual who, senior executive at a major American company, and he had achieved a lot of success in his work, but he was told that he could not go any farther in the organization unless he became kinder and started to practice some EQ. He always achieved his results, financial results, but in order to do that, he really bruised a lot of people. And over the course of our work together, one-on-one, and then ultimately with his direct reports and with his entire team as a cultural change project, I watched him evolve into someone who was very open, who understood how to practice empathy, transparency, candor, who had control over his character, over his personality, and who now is considered in the same organization. He continues to advance a mentor, a go-to leader in the organization to help others grow, perform, and excel. So it can be done. He has a lot of influence, and I know that he's impacting not only his division, but also the company at large.
Well, and other stakeholders to that enterprise as well, then.
Right. That's right.
What do you see, just as we, begin to think of maybe this and one other closing question, what are some of the trends we should be aware of in diversity, equity, and inclusion work?
So I don't know that it's a trend yet, but I'm certainly pounding the pavement to make it such that organizations not only focus on the traditional structures for DEI, but that they also get into behavior on teams. It's more difficult to do that because it means actually diving into specific behaviors and then figuring out how to operationalize that across an organization. But there are ways of doing it, and it is the most important thing I think organizations can do to create a shift, a change in behavior across an organization so that teams of people, work groups feel that they not only belong, but that they can share their uniqueness. So they create inclusion. Yeah.
Sophia, are there, how can people be in touch with you other than through the lexiconlens.com site? What are the ways?
Sure. So reach me at LinkedIn at Sophia Kristjansson. Also find me at Sophia at lexiconlens.com. Feel free to email me and stay in touch in those two ways. I honestly am not sure whether or not I'll be going back to Twitter, but we'll see. So I won't advertise my handle right now, but certainly find me on LinkedIn.
It's been a delight, Sophia, to have you as a guest on Authentic Change with Mike Horn. Sophia specializes in diversity, equity, and inclusion, cultural change, and learning development for their leaders and teams. Please visit her at all of the sites that she mentioned, and you'll find that in the show notes for today's episode. Once again, Sophia, thank you.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change Podcast.